The arsenic bottle slipped from Margaret O'Sullivan's trembling fingers, shattering against the wooden floor of the Triple Bar Ranch house. In the doorway stood Daniel Mackenzie, his gray eyes burning with a mixture of rage and heartbreak that would haunt him forever. "Tell me it isn't true, Maggie." His voice cracked like winter ice. "Tell me you didn't." But the truth hung between them heavier than Colorado mountain snow. 6 months of shared warmth, stolen kisses and whispered promises, all built on the grave of a murdered man. Margaret's dark hair cascaded over her shoulders as she sank to her knees, her silk nightgown clinging to curves that had driven him to madness. "Dan, please, let me explain." The wind howled through the valley, carrying secrets that should have stayed buried in Boston. In the frontier, a man's past could kill him. But what about a woman's? Where are you watching from tonight? Drop a comment and let us know your location. And if this story grabs you, hit that subscribe button. We're just getting started. December 1885. The San Luis Valley lay buried under 3 feet of snow, and Daniel Mackenzie was slowly losing his mind. Not from the cold, not from the cattle dying in frozen fields, from loneliness that aided him like acid. At 26, he owned 800 head of prime beef and 2,000 acres of the finest grazing land in Colorado Territory. But success meant nothing when you had nobody to share it with. 3 years since his father died at Wounded Knee. 3 years of talking to no one but old Pete and the cattle. 3 years without a woman's touch. The ride into Silverton Creek took 2 hours through knee-deep drifts. Dan's breath frosted in the air as he tied his mare to the hitching post outside Brennan's boarding house. He needed supplies. Salt pork, coffee, ammunition. What he didn't expect was her. Margaret O'Sullivan sat in the front parlor, like a queen holding court with ghosts. Black wool dress that emphasized every curve of her mature figure. Auburn hair pinned up to reveal a swan's neck that begged for a man's lips. Green eyes that held secrets deeper than mine shafts. She was reading. A book of poetry. In a frontier town where most folks couldn't spell their own names. "Ma'am?" Dan touched his hat brim. She looked up and something electric passed between them. Recognition. Not of faces, but of needs. Hungers. "Sir." Her voice carried the refined accent of eastern cities. Boston, maybe, or Philadelphia. "Daniel Mackenzie. I own the Triple Bar Spread, about 10 miles north." Margaret O'Sullivan. Recently widowed. She closed the book, finger marking her place. "I'm seeking employment. Domestic work." The word widowed hit him like whiskey on an empty stomach. Here was a woman who understood loss, who might understand him. "What kind of domestic work?" His voice came out rougher than intended. A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Cooking. Cleaning. Managing a household?" Pause. "Whatever a man might need." The way she said whatever sent heat straight to his groin. This wasn't some farm girl blushing at shadows. This was a woman who knew exactly what she was offering. "Winter's hard up at the ranch," Dan said carefully. "Isolated. Just me and my foreman." "I'm not afraid of isolation, Mr. Mackenzie. Sometimes it's preferable to complications." Ruth Brennan appeared with tea, shooting meaningful glances between them. The whole town would be talking by tomorrow. Dan didn't care. The work would be steady through spring. Room, board, and $20 a month. 30. He should have negotiated. Any sensible businessman would have. Instead, he found himself nodding like a schoolboy. 30 it is. "When can you start?" "Tonight, if you'll have me." Those words, "if you'll have me," spoken in that husky voice, nearly broke his composure. Dan cleared his throat. Already the buckboard. Loading her trunk, he caught the scent of her perfume, lavender and something darker, more exotic. It made his hands shake as he secured the canvas cover. The ride back to Triple Bar passed in charged silence. Snow fell in fat flakes, blanketing them in intimacy. Margaret sat close beside him, her hip pressing against his thigh with every bump in the trail. He was achingly aware of her breathing, the way she tucked wayward strands of hair behind her ear. "You're not what I expected," she said, as they crested the hill overlooking his spread. "What did you expect?" "Someone older. More settled." The Triple Bar stretched before them. Ranch house, barns, corrals, all his by blood and sweat. But seeing it through her eyes, Dan felt its emptiness like a physical ache. "I've been settled too long," he admitted. "Maybe it's time for some unsettling." She turned to study his profile in the moonlight. "Careful what you wish for, Mr. Mackenzie. Some kinds of unsettling can destroy a man." He should have paid attention to that warning, should have recognized the danger in her tone. Instead, all he could think about was how her lips would taste, how her skin would feel against his. Old Pete emerged from the bunkhouse as they pulled up to the main house, his weathered face skeptical. "This the new housekeeper?" "Margaret O'Sullivan," Dan said. "Mrs. O'Sullivan, my foreman, Pete Rawlings." Pete touched his hat, but his eyes stayed wary. "Ma'am, I'll help with your things." "That's very kind." As they unloaded her trunk, Dan noticed how little she'd brought. A woman fleeing, not traveling. But fleeing what? "I'll show you to your room," Dan said, leading her inside. The house felt different with her in it. Warmer, more alive. Margaret moved through the rooms like she belonged there, fingers trailing over furniture, walls, door frames. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "A real home." The way she said it, like she'd been searching for home her whole life, made something twist in Dan's chest. Standing at the foot of the stairs, her looking down at him, he felt the weight of possibility. And danger. What had he just invited into his house? Margaret O'Sullivan proved to be everything Dan had dreamed of, and nothing he'd prepared for. She transformed the Triple Bar from a bachelor's hollow cave into something approaching civilization. Meals that were art instead of sustenance. Venison steaks and rich wine sauce, biscuits that melted on the tongue, apple pies that made old Pete weep with gratitude. She mended clothes with delicate stitches, organized cupboards with military precision, and filled the house with scents of beeswax and lavender. But it was the small intimacies that drove Dan to distraction. The way she hummed while kneading bread, her body swaying to some internal rhythm that made his blood pound. How she bent to stoke the fire, silk stockings visible beneath her lifted skirts. The habit she had of loosening her hair before bed, running fingers through auburn waves while standing silhouetted in her bedroom doorway. She knew exactly what she was doing to him. Christmas Eve arrived with a blizzard that buried the valley in silence. Dan found Margaret in the parlor, curled in his father's leather chair, with a book and a glass of brandy. Firelight painted gold highlights across her skin. "Merry Christmas," she said, lifting her glass. Dan poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey. "Not much of a celebration. I've had worse." Something dark flickered across her face. "At least here, I'm wanted." Wanted. The word hung between them like smoke. Margaret set down her book. More poetry, he noticed, and studied him with those green eyes. "You're a puzzle, Daniel Mackenzie. Young man, with an old man's ranch. Handsome enough to have your pick of girls, but living like a monk." The whiskey burned his throat. "Maybe I'm particular. Or maybe you're afraid." "Afraid of what?" She rose from the chair in one fluid motion, moving to stand before him. close enough that he could count the freckles dusting her nose, close enough to smell that exotic perfume. Of wanting something you can't control. Her hand touched his chest, fingers spreading over his heart. Dan's breath caught. "I'm not some farm girl who will swoon at pretty words," Margaret whispered. "I'm a woman who knows what she wants." "And what's that?" Instead of answering, she kissed him. Soft at first, testing, then deeper when he responded, her tongue sliding against his with practiced skill. Dan's control shattered like winter ice. His arms went around her, pulling her against him, feeling every curve through the thin fabric of her dress. She tasted like brandy and promises, like everything he'd been starving for. Margaret pulled back, breathing hard. "I should go to my room." "Should." Dan's voice was hoarse. "But will you?" Her smile was pure sin. "That depends on whether you're brave enough to follow." She walked away, hips swaying, leaving him standing there like a man struck by lightning. Dan lasted exactly 3 minutes before going after her. He found her standing by her window, still fully dressed, but with her hair down, cascading over her shoulders like dark water. Moonlight turned her skin to porcelain. "I was wondering if you'd come," she said without turning around. "I shouldn't be here." "No." She faced him, and her eyes were liquid fire. "You shouldn't." But she was already unbuttoning her dress, fingers moving with deliberate slowness. The fabric whispered to the floor, revealing curves that made his mouth go dry. Full breasts that rose and fell with her quickened breathing. A waist he could span with his hands. Hips that spoke of womanliness, experience, the kind of pleasure he'd only dreamed about. "God, Maggie." She came to him then, pressing her naked body against his clothed one, her hands working at his shirt buttons. "I've been alone so long," she whispered against his throat. "Don't make me be alone tonight." What followed was fire and whiskey and desperate need. Dan had been with women before, saloon girls who traded bodies for coins. But this was different. Margaret gave herself to him like a gift, responding to his touch with gasps and sighs that drove him wild. She guided his hands, teaching him what she liked, showing him pleasures he'd never imagined. When it was over, they lay tangled in her narrow bed, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "Stay," she whispered. He should have returned to his own room. Should have maintained some pretense of propriety. Instead, Dan pulled the quilt over them both and held her close. "Maggie," he said into the darkness, "what happened to your husband?" Her body went tense against him. "He died. Pneumonia." "That's all." A long pause. What else would there be? But something in her voice made him wonder. A careful quality, like she'd rehearsed the words. "Nothing," Dan said finally. "Nothing at all." Margaret relaxed again, her breathing gradually evening out. But Dan lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the small voice in his head that whispered, "Everyone has secrets. Even her. Especially her." Winter deepened its grip on the San Luis Valley, and Daniel Mackenzie fell deeper under Margaret O'Sullivan's spell. She moved into his bedroom without discussion, bringing her lavender scent and midnight whispers. Dan had never known such contentment. Days filled with honest work, nights filled with honest passion. She met his hunger with her own, teaching him that a woman's desire could burn as fierce as any man's. "Marry me," he said one February morning, watching her braid her hair at his mirror. Her hands stilled. "Dan." "I mean it." He rose from the bed, crossing to wrap his arms around her from behind. "Come spring, we'll have the circuit preacher up from Alamosa. Make it proper." In the mirror, her green eyes met his. Something vulnerable flickered there, quickly hidden. You don't know me well enough for marriage. I know enough. His lips found the sensitive spot behind her ear. I know you taste like honey in the morning. I know you cry out my name when I touch you. Just so. I know you're the best thing that ever happened to this ranch. And if you learn things about my past, things that might change your feelings? Dan turned her to face him. Maggie, I don't give a damn about your past. Only our future. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. My sweet, trusting Daniel. That afternoon, while Margaret hung laundry and hummed a tune from her mysterious past, old Pete pulled Dan aside. Boss, we need to talk. They walked to the barn, Pete's face grim as winter clouds. It's about your woman. Careful, Pete. No, you be careful. The old foreman's voice was sharp. I was in town yesterday, picking up supplies. Got to talking with Ruth Brennan. Dan felt something cold settle in his stomach. And woman asked some questions about Mrs. O'Sullivan's background. Seems she's been mighty curious about poison symptoms. Asked the doc about arsenic specifically. So? Maybe she's worried about rat poison around the house. Pete shook his head. Ruth wrote to her cousin in Boston. Works for the police there. Asked about a Patrick O'Sullivan, died last September. The cold in Dan's stomach spread to his chest. What did she find? Man died sudden-like. Rich Irish merchant, married 15 years to a much younger woman. No children. Pete's weathered hands twisted his hat. Symptoms matched arsenic poisoning, but the widow was already gone west before anyone thought to investigate. Dan stared at the old man, mind reeling. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about protecting you, boy. This woman shows up out of nowhere, beautiful as sin and twice as tempting. Gets her hooks into you real quick. Makes you think with your cock instead of your brain. That's enough. But even as Dan said it, pieces were clicking into place. Margaret's nervousness whenever letters arrived from back east. Her careful questions about the local law. The way she sometimes woke from nightmares, calling out names he didn't recognize. Where is she now? Pete asked. Dan looked toward the house, where smoke curled from the chimney and laundry danced on the line. Where Margaret waited, probably preparing another perfect meal, ready to welcome him with soft kisses and softer curves. I don't believe it, he said finally. Then prove me wrong. Search her things. Ask her direct. But Dan was already walking back to the house, Pete's words echoing in his head. Makes you think with your cock instead of your brain. He found Margaret in the kitchen, flour dusting her apron as she rolled out dough for biscuits. Domestic perfection, all curves and competence and feminine grace. You're early, she said, smiling. Supper won't be ready for... I need to ask you something. Something in his tone made her stiffen. What is it? Dan studied her face, looking for tells, for guilt, for the truth he suddenly dreaded finding. How exactly did your husband die, Maggie? Her rolling pin stilled, color drained from her cheeks. I told you. Pneumonia. Did he suffer? Daniel, why are you... Did he suffer, Margaret? She set down the rolling pin with careful precision. Yes, he suffered. From lung fever. A long pause. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. No. From arsenic poisoning. The words hit Dan like a physical blow. He stepped back, hand instinctively moving to his gun belt. Jesus Christ, Maggie. Let me explain. You killed him. Yes. Her chin lifted, defiant even in confession. I killed him. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the air too thick to breathe. This woman who had shared his bed, who had whispered sweet promises in the dark, who had made him believe in happiness again. She was a murderer. Why? The word came out broken. Margaret's hands trembled as she untied her apron. Because he was killing me. Slowly, with his fists, his cruelties, his demands. 15 years of marriage that was really slavery. So you poisoned him. I freed myself. Dan backed toward the door, mind spinning. How do I know you won't do the same to me? Her face crumpled. Because I love you, you fool. For the first time in my miserable life, I love someone. But love from a killer? Was that love at all? Or just another kind of poison? Outside, the wind howled like all the demons in hell. The bottle of arsenic sat on the kitchen table between them like a loaded gun. Margaret had retrieved it from her trunk without being asked, her movements calm despite the tears streaming down her face. I kept it, she said quietly. Insurance, I suppose, in case the past caught up with me. Dan couldn't take his eyes off the small brown bottle. Such an innocent thing to hold such deadly power. I should turn you in. Yes, you should. The law's looking for you. I know. You used me, seduced me to keep yourself safe. Margaret flinched as if he'd struck her. At first, yes, but not after. Never after. Dan thought about the past months, her laughter in the morning, her hands healing his wounds, the way she'd transformed his hollow house into something approaching paradise. The nights when she'd held him through his own nightmares, whispering that he was worthy of love. If I let you go, he said slowly, can you promise me you'll never kill again? I swear it. And if you stay? She looked up, hope and fear warring in her green eyes. Then I'll spend every day of my life proving that I'm more than my worst moment. Outside, old Pete was waiting, with the horses saddled, ready to ride for the sheriff. 3 miles through the snow to town. 3 miles to turn in the woman who'd saved him from loneliness. Dan picked up the arsenic bottle. Margaret didn't flinch as he walked to the stove and threw it into the fire. The glass shattered, flames flaring green and deadly. Patrick O'Sullivan is dead, he said. Margaret Mackenzie has never existed. Far as anyone knows, you came to Colorado a widow and will leave it a wife. She collapsed against him then, sobbing into his chest. Dan held her close, breathing in lavender and secrets and the promise of redemption. Some men were saved by God, others by whiskey or gold or war. Daniel Mackenzie was saved by a woman who'd murdered for love. Under the Colorado moon, stranger things had happened. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the frontier. And tell us in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Until next time, remember, we all have secrets worth hiding, and someone worth revealing them for.